Welcome to Void of Fears, where the line between reality and nightmares blur with every tale. What you're about to hear has happened to someone, somewhere, perhaps even someone just like you. Our community continues to grow, and now we're reaching for 100,000 subscribers. If these glimpses into the unknown call to you, please consider subscribing. Now let's dive into tonight's story. The desert heat shimmered off the Nevada asphalt as Danny Morrison slammed his foot harder on the accelerator. The stolen government SUV roared through the barren landscape, its engine screaming in protest. Behind him, the distinctive whop 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 of military helicopters grew louder by the second. Morrison's hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the steering wheel. He'd been planning this heist for 3 years, ever since he'd stumbled across references to Apollo 19 in classified documents he wasn't supposed to see. As a former NASA engineer with level 5 clearance, he knew the moon missions better than anyone. Apollo 11 through 17 were public knowledge, historical achievements that defined an era. But Apollo 19 wasn't supposed to exist. The digital clock on his dashboard read 3:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, the morning shift would discover the breach at Facility Black Mountain, a storage depot that officially didn't exist on any government maps. Morrison had used his old NASA credentials and 3 carefully forged security badges to penetrate the compound's outer defenses. Getting inside had required every trick he'd learned during his 20 years with NASA's Classified Projects Division. "Come on, you piece of junk," Morrison muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The metal briefcase handcuffed to his left wrist bounced violently against the door as he took another sharp turn around a towering red rock formation. Inside that case was footage that would change everything the world thought it knew about space exploration and humanity's place in the universe. The facility he'd infiltrated had been a labyrinth of underground levels and security checkpoints. Sub-basement level 7, behind 3 different vault doors, each requiring different biometric scans and security protocols. The final vault had contained only a single metal box, marked with radiation warnings, and a label that made his blood run cold. Apollo 19 Mission Archive, Project Prometheus, Eyes Only, Authorized Personnel Clearance Level Omega. His radio crackled to life, cutting through the roar of wind and engine noise. "Danny, this is Riley. Where the hell are you? I'm getting reports of military helicopters mobilizing across 3 states. Every news outlet in the country is getting calls about a massive manhunt in Nevada. What did you find in there?" Morrison grabbed the radio with his free hand, never taking his eyes off the winding desert highway. Riley Park was the only investigative journalist he trusted, someone who'd spent 15 years exposing government cover-ups and had the scars to prove it. She'd broken stories about illegal CIA experiments, military weapons testing on civilians, and environmental disasters that the government had tried to hide. If anyone would get this story out without being silenced, it was her. "Riley, listen to me very carefully. Everything we thought we knew about the Apollo program is a complete fabrication. The moon landing you don't know about. It's all here in this briefcase. Apollo 19 wasn't cancelled due to budget cuts like NASA claimed in 1973. It was classified at the highest levels of government. And what they found up there, a bullet shattered his rear window, cutting him off mid-sentence. The sound of gunfire mixed with the helicopter rotors as government forces closed in from multiple directions. Morrison could see their muzzle flashes reflected in his side mirrors. "Danny, you're breaking up. What did they find up there? Danny, talk to me." The helicopters were directly overhead now, their spotlights turning the pre-dawn desert into harsh daylight. Morrison could see the roadblock ahead, spike strips glinting in the intense illumination. Military vehicles formed an imposing wall across Highway 95 with soldiers positioned behind concrete barriers. He had maybe 30 seconds before they closed the trap completely. Morrison's heart pounded as he realized the full scope of what he'd uncovered in those underground vaults. The briefcase contained far more than just mission footage. There were medical records showing the Apollo 19 crew underwent extensive psychological evaluation and treatment after their return to Earth. Autopsy reports indicated all 3 astronauts died within 6 months of the mission, each from different causes that seemed unrelated, but were suspiciously convenient for maintaining operational security. Most disturbing were the photographs, high-resolution images that showed structures on the lunar surface that definitely weren't built by any human civilization. Riley, I'm uploading everything to the Dead Man's Switch right now. If I don't make it out of this alive, this footage goes to every major network simultaneously across the globe. The world needs to know what really happened in 1974 and what's been happening in secret ever since. Morrison's thumb hovered over a small red button mounted on his dashboard. The device he'd built himself over 6 months of careful preparation would simultaneously upload the encrypted files to servers in 12 different countries distributed through networks that no single government could control or suppress. Even if they killed him, the truth would survive and spread. 20 seconds to the spike strips. His speedometer showed 93 miles per hour. In his rearview mirror, he could see muzzle flashes from the pursuing helicopters as military marksmen tried to disable his vehicle. They weren't shooting to stop him anymore. They were shooting to kill. Tell them Danny Morrison died trying to expose the truth about what's coming for all of us, he whispered into the radio. Tell them Apollo 19 was just the beginning of something much bigger and much worse. The SUV hit the spike strips at full speed. The tires exploded instantly, sending the vehicle into a violent roll that seemed to go on forever. As Morrison's world turned upside down in a chaos of breaking glass and twisting metal, his thumb found the red button. The briefcase's contents were already uploading to servers around the globe, encrypted and distributed beyond any government's ability to stop or contain. The wreckage came to rest in a cloud of dust and twisted metal. Morrison's vision blurred as blood ran down his face, but he managed to smile through the pain. Through his cracked windshield, he could see soldiers approaching, with weapons drawn and communications equipment. But it was too late. The upload progress bar on his phone showed 100% complete. "Sir, the package is secure, but the digital upload finished before impact," one of the soldiers reported into his radio. "Repeat, the classified files are already in the wild and spreading across the internet." Morrison used his last breath to laugh, a sound that mixed triumph with the knowledge that he'd changed everything. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the distinctive sound of news helicopters approaching from multiple directions. The story was about to break worldwide, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop the truth from spreading. Within minutes, newsrooms from New York to Tokyo were receiving the same shocking files through their secure channels. Emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming worldwide as editors and producers struggled to verify the authenticity of what they were seeing, while government officials desperately tried to claim the footage was fabricated. This is CNN with breaking news at 4:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Classified footage has just been released showing a secret NASA mission to the moon in 1974. The footage, which appears to be authentic based on preliminary analysis, documents what's being called Apollo 19, a mission that officially never existed. We're going live to our space correspondent, Dr. Amanda Torres, who's been analysing this footage with our technical team for the past hour. The grainy black and white footage began to play on screens around the world, transmitted simultaneously across every major news network and social media platform. A timestamp in the corner read October 12th, 1974, 8:15 a.m. mission time. A man in a spacesuit looked directly into the camera, his face grim and determined through his helmet visor. Behind him, the interior of a spacecraft was visible, but it was unlike any NASA vehicle the public had ever seen. My name is Commander Rick Stone, call sign Hammer, NASA astronaut serial number 4471 Delta. If you're watching this recording, it means something went catastrophically wrong with our mission, and we didn't make it home alive. What I'm about to tell you will sound completely impossible, but I swear on my life and the lives of my crew that every single word is true. I'm recording this as our official mission log because I have a terrible feeling that we're not coming back to Earth, and someone needs to know what really happened up here. The camera pulled back to reveal 3 astronauts in the cramped confines of a spacecraft that was clearly more militaristic than exploratory. The walls were lined with weapon storage compartments, advanced communication arrays, and monitoring equipment that belonged in a war zone rather than a scientific mission. Stone continued, his voice steady, despite the obvious gravity of his words. This is pilot Jennifer Cross, call sign Phoenix, the best pilot NASA's ever produced, and a veteran of classified missions that the public will never know about. And this is our mission specialist, Dr. Alan Kane, call sign Prophet, whose expertise in xenogeology and extraterrestrial studies made him essential to what we thought was going to be a simple reconnaissance mission. Cross leaned towards the camera, her red hair visible beneath her helmet. At 32, she was one of NASA's most experienced pilots, having flown classified missions over Vietnam and Southeast Asia, as well as test flights for experimental aircraft that wouldn't be publicly acknowledged for another decade. Her expression was serious as she addressed the camera. Our official mission parameters stated we were investigating unusual seismic activity on the lunar far side. That was a complete fabrication, designed to hide our real purpose. We're actually investigating massive explosions that have been detected coming from the moon over the past 8 months. Energy releases equivalent to multiple hydrogen bombs, happening with increasing frequency and following patterns that suggest intelligent control and coordination. Kane, adjusting his thick glasses, was the youngest of the crew at 28, but his doctorate in xenogeology and his top-secret clearance for Project Blue Book made him the only scientist qualified for what they expected to encounter. The energy signatures we've detected suggest weapons testing or industrial activity on a scale that shouldn't be possible with any known human technology. Our intelligence reports indicate the Soviets have established multiple military installations on the lunar far side, potentially with technological capabilities far beyond what our satellites have observed in their Earth-based facilities. Stone's voice grew more serious as he looked directly into the camera. What we found up there was infinitely worse than enemy missiles or Soviet military bases, far worse than any human threat we could have imagined in our worst nightmares. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the very beginning, because whoever finds this recording needs to understand exactly what happened up here and why we made the impossible choices we did. The footage cut to launch day 3 months earlier. Unlike the public Apollo launches with their massive crowds and international media coverage, this one took place in the dead of night from a facility hidden in the Nevada desert that didn't appear on any official government maps. The rocket, designated Saturn V Modified, was significantly larger than its predecessors and carried experimental weaponry that violated several international treaties on the militarization of space. Launch commenced at 11:47 p.m. Pacific Time, July 15th, 1974. Stone's voice narrated over footage of Earth shrinking behind them as they climbed towards orbit. Weather conditions were optimal and initial trajectory calculations were nominal. We had absolutely no idea that our launch had been detected by enemy surveillance satellites, or that we were flying directly into a trap that had been carefully set months in advance. The scene shifted to the spacecraft's interior during their first day in space. The crew looked relaxed and professional, going through their routine procedures as they settled in for what was supposed to be a standard 3-day journey to the moon. Cross was meticulously monitoring their navigation systems, while Kane conducted preliminary experiments on mineral samples they brought for comparison studies with whatever they might find on the lunar surface. Day 1 of transit went smoothly, according to all of our parameters, Stone continued. We used the time to review our detailed mission parameters and study the classified intelligence reports about suspected Soviet lunar activity. What we didn't know was that our launch signature had been analysed by enemy computer systems, and they'd calculated our exact trajectory and probable destination. The mood in the footage changed dramatically on day 2. Alarms were blaring throughout the cabin, and red warning lights flashed from every console and instrument panel. Cross was frantically working at the navigation station, while Kane monitored their long-range sensors with growing alarm and disbelief. Soviet weapons platforms just went active across multiple orbital positions, Cross reported, her voice tight with concentration and barely controlled fear. I'm counting at least 12 different targeting systems locking onto our trajectory. They're not just tracking us, they're preparing to engage with everything they've got positioned up here. Through the small porthole, they could see the distinctive exhaust trails of enemy missiles streaking toward them from hidden satellite platforms that had been positioned along their route like a carefully planned ambush. The Soviets hadn't just detected their launch, they'd been waiting for exactly this mission. Stone grabbed the manual flight controls, his years of military test pilot training taking over completely. All hands secure for emergency combat maneuvers. This is about to become a fighting retreat through hostile territory. He threw the spacecraft into an aggressive evasive pattern, using every advanced technique he'd learned during his years as a combat pilot in Korea and his subsequent time testing experimental aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base. The first missile explodes close enough to rattle their hull violently, the shockwave sending loose equipment flying throughout the cabin and triggering multiple system warnings. Cross worked frantically to deploy their experimental defensive systems, cutting-edge technology that had never been tested in actual combat conditions. Energy shields flickered to life around their hull, just as another missile detonated close enough to temporarily overload their electrical systems and plunge them into darkness. Massive debris field directly ahead, Kane called out, studying his sensor displays with growing concern. This is incredible. Looks like the Soviets have been extremely busy up here for months, or maybe years. I'm reading the remains of at least 8 different spacecraft, some of them definitely not Soviet design or configuration. As they cleared the immediate missile threat through Stone's superior piloting, something even more disturbing appeared on their long-range sensors. The moon itself was showing absolutely massive energy signatures, concentrated on the far side where no human mission had ever travelled or even attempted to land. The power readings were completely off the charts, suggesting industrial facilities on a scale that dwarfed anything that existed on Earth. "Dear God," Cross whispered, staring at her instrument displays in complete disbelief. "Look at the size of those power signatures emanating from the surface. They've built entire industrial complexes up there. How long have they been conducting these operations?" Kane was furiously working to decode intercepted Soviet transmissions when his face went completely pale with horror. "Rick, Jenny, you absolutely need to hear this immediately. I've managed to break their military encryption protocols. The explosions we detected weren't weapons tests or mining operations like we assumed. According to these intercepted communications, they were desperate attempts to contain something they discovered buried deep beneath the lunar surface, something that's been actively fighting to escape." Before anyone could respond to this deeply disturbing news, proximity alarms screamed throughout the cabin with ear-splitting intensity. A Soviet spacecraft had emerged from behind the moon, its configuration completely unlike anything in their extensive intelligence files. It was significantly larger than their own craft and bristling with weapon systems that seemed decades ahead of known Soviet technology. "Contact! Contact!" Cross shouted, her extensive pilot training taking over completely. "Soviet lunar class interceptor bearing 090, closing fast and aggressive. Weapons are hot and actively targeting our position. The enemy craft opened fire immediately. No warning, no communication attempts, no diplomatic protocols whatsoever. Bright energy beams lanced through the vacuum of space as the stone threw the Thunderbolt into desperate combat maneuvers that pushed both the spacecraft and crew to their absolute limits. This wasn't space exploration anymore. It was a fight for survival against a superior enemy force. Cross returned fire with their experimental weapon systems, brilliant streams of coherent energy that lit up the darkness of space like artificial lightning. The Soviet craft was incredibly fast and heavily armed, its pilot clearly experienced in zero-gravity combat situations. Only Stone's superior training and natural piloting ability kept them alive as they exchanged devastating volleys in the darkness above the moon's surface. Critical hull breach in Section 3, Kane reported as another enemy energy beam punched completely through their protective shielding. We're losing atmosphere rapidly. Emergency systems are compensating, but we can't sustain this level of damage much longer. Stone managed to score a direct hit on the Soviet craft's main engine section with one of their experimental weapons, sending the enemy vessel spinning toward the lunar surface in a trail of fire and venting atmosphere. But the Thunderbolt was critically damaged, her main engines failing completely and life support systems operating on backup power that wouldn't last more than a few hours. "Emergency landing procedures, everyone," Stone announced, his voice remaining calm despite their absolutely desperate situation. "Secure for hard impact. We're going down to the surface and we're going down fast and hard." The spacecraft hit the lunar surface at nearly 200 miles per hour, the violent impact throwing them against their crash restraints with bone-jarring force that knocked Kane unconscious immediately. They bounced twice across the rocky terrain, each impact worse than the last, before finally sliding to a stop in a massive cloud of lunar dust and debris that obscured their vision completely. Through their cracked and spiderwebbed viewport, they could see the Soviet craft had crashed approximately 1 mile away across the barren landscape. Smoke and debris surrounded the enemy wreckage, but, incredibly, there appeared to be survivors moving around the crash site with purpose, and those survivors were already organizing and heading in their direction, clearly armed and obviously hostile. "Kane's unconscious and hurt badly," Cross reported, quickly checking their mission specialists' vital signs with their emergency medical equipment. Blood trickled from a serious gash on his forehead, and his breathing was shallow but steady. Severe head trauma from the impact, but his pulse is strong and stable. Stone was already moving, with military efficiency, his extensive combat training taking over as he began suiting up for what was clearly going to be ground combat in an environment that could kill them as easily as enemy fire. "We need to establish and secure a defensive perimeter before those Soviet survivors reach our position. They'll be armed with whatever they managed to salvage from their crash, and they definitely know exactly where we are." They quickly improvised weapons from their emergency supplies. A modified cutting torch that could serve as a close-range energy weapon, several explosive charges that had been intended for geological sampling, and a military-issue sidearm that Stone had brought against official NASA regulations. In the low lunar gravity, even these makeshift weapons could prove devastatingly effective against human opponents. Setting out across the alien landscape, they moved carefully from crater to crater, using the stark and unforgiving terrain for cover. The lunar surface was far more treacherous than their training simulations had prepared them for, with hidden crevasses and unstable areas that could trap or seriously injure them. The enemy cosmonauts were already advancing on their position with military precision, at least 4 of them visible in the distance, moving with the practiced coordination of experienced soldiers. The firefight that followed was unlike anything in the history of human space exploration. Bright energy beams and explosive charges lit up the lunar landscape, as both sides fought desperately for survival in an environment that was completely hostile to human life. The low gravity made combat unpredictable and extremely dangerous, with combatants able to leap incredible distances but also vulnerable to being thrown off balance by their own weapon's recoil. Stone's extensive military experience proved absolutely invaluable as he coordinated their defense, using hand signals and tactical positioning learned in terrestrial combat, but adapted for the unique and deadly challenges of lunar warfare. Cross used her pilot's precision and naturally steady nerves to lay down accurate covering fire, while Stone methodically flanked the enemy position using a series of interconnected craters. The battle lasted nearly 2 hours of continuous combat, with both sides trading shots across the barren and airless landscape. They managed to wound 2 of the enemy cosmonauts and capture a third after a fierce hand-to-hand struggle in a deep crater that provided cover from the remaining enemy fire. The 4th Soviet had fled back toward his crash site, presumably to call for reinforcements from whatever base they'd launched from. The captured Soviet, Major Dmitry Petrov, surprised them by speaking in accented but completely fluent English. His face was pale with terror that seemed to go far beyond their current tactical situation, and his hands shook uncontrollably as he looked around the lunar landscape with obvious fear. "Americans, please, I beg you to listen to me carefully. We did not come here to fight you or engage in combat operations. We came here desperately trying to escape from them, to get away from what we discovered down there in the depths." "Escape from who exactly?" Cross demanded, keeping her improvised energy weapon trained directly on his chest. "What are you talking about? What did you and your people find down there?" Petrov's eyes were wide with a fear that seemed to penetrate his very soul and shake him to his core. "The things we discovered deep beneath the lunar surface, the things that have been waiting in the darkness for longer than human civilization has existed. My original team consisted of 12 men, the absolute best cosmonauts in the entire Soviet space program. After only 2 days exploring the underground facility we discovered, only 3 of us remained alive." By this time, Kane had regained consciousness and managed to join them, his head bandaged with medical supplies from their emergency kit. Despite his serious injuries, his scientific curiosity remained intact and his questions were sharp and focused on gathering critical information. "What kind of facility are you referring to?" Kane asked urgently. "Our intelligence reports indicated Soviet mining operations and possibly weapons testing, not underground exploration. What exactly did you find beneath the surface?" Petrov led them across the barren and desolate landscape towards his original landing site, pointing out various landmarks and explaining what his team had discovered during their initial exploration. When they finally reached the Soviet excavation site, the evidence of massive underground construction was absolutely unmistakable. Heavy digging equipment surrounded what appeared to be the entrance to a vast underground complex. But as they approached closer, they realized that the architecture was immediately and profoundly wrong in ways that challenged human understanding. The surfaces seemed to shift and flow in ways that hurt to look at directly, and the geometric patterns followed no human understanding of structural engineering, physics, or aesthetics. "We came here 8 months ago with a full scientific and military team," Petrov explained as they prepared to descend into the facility. "Our official mission was to establish a permanent military base and orbital weapons platform to threaten American satellites and space missions. But instead of empty lunar terrain, we found this. It's incredibly ancient, far older than human civilization by thousands or possibly millions of years. And it's definitely not empty or abandoned." The entrance led to a vast network of tunnels and chambers that had been carved from solid lunar rock with tools and techniques that completely defied explanation. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to move and shift when viewed peripherally, and the passages themselves followed geometric patterns that made absolutely no sense according to human understanding of three-dimensional space. Kane's scientific instruments were registering readings that should have been completely impossible according to known physics. Energy signatures from deep below suggested power sources operating on principles that human science couldn't begin to explain. The temperature readings were equally baffling, showing areas that were significantly warmer than the lunar surface despite being buried beneath tons of solid rock. "This is absolutely incredible," Kane whispered, studying his instrument readings, with growing excitement mixed with deep concern. "This entire place is still active, after what could be thousands or even millions of years of operation. Whatever built this facility, whatever technology they used to construct it, it's still functioning perfectly." As they descended deeper into the facility, they began finding evidence of the Soviet exploration team's tragic fate scattered throughout the tunnels. Bodies were scattered everywhere, but they hadn't been killed by conventional weapons or equipment failures. Instead, they'd been torn apart by something with incredible strength and what appeared to be multiple sets of razor-sharp claws or cutting implements. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the passages: family photographs, letters from home written in Cyrillic script, scientific equipment that had been shredded and twisted beyond any hope of recognition. In one large chamber, they discovered a detailed journal written in Russian that Kane began translating with growing horror. According to this journal, Kane reported, his voice growing quieter and more disturbed as he read the increasingly frantic entries, the Soviet team discovered that this entire facility is some kind of advanced containment system, a prison designed specifically to hold something that the original builders considered too dangerous to destroy but too valuable or important to simply eliminate. The journal documented the team's growing horror as they explored deeper into the facility and began to understand the true nature of what they'd stumbled into. The entries became increasingly frantic and desperate as team members began disappearing one by one, taken by something that hunted them through the tunnels with methodical precision and obvious intelligence. "You need to hear this final entry," Kane said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The creatures aren't just contained here like prisoners. They've been using this place as a staging ground, a base of operations for something much larger and more terrifying. The radio signals from Earth have been systematically reactivating dormant systems throughout the entire facility. They're actively preparing for something. God help us all, I think they're preparing to leave this place and launch some kind of coordinated attack on Earth." That's when they heard the sound that would haunt their nightmares for the rest of their lives. A deep, resonant howl that seemed to come from the very walls around them, vibrating through the solid rock and into their bones, with frequencies that human ears weren't designed to process. It was answered by similar calls from deeper in the facility, creating a chorus of inhuman voices that spoke of malevolent intelligence and terrifying purpose. Petrov went completely pale, his hands shaking as he gripped his weapon with white knuckles. "The Guardian is awake," he whispered in absolute terror. "When the Guardian calls, all the others will follow. We need to leave this place immediately before they organize." The creature that emerged from the deeper tunnels was a nightmare fusion of organic and mechanical components that challenged their fundamental understanding of what life could be. It was absolutely massive, easily 8 feet tall, with multiple limbs that moved with terrifying speed and precision. Its hide seemed to be composed of both advanced metallic plating and organic tissue that shifted and flowed as it moved. Multiple eyes glowed with an intelligence that was definitely not human, and its movements suggested a level of coordination and strategic planning that indicated highly sophisticated cognitive abilities. This wasn't just a mindless predator acting on instinct. It was something that could think and plan and adapt to new threats. Its attack was swift and brutally efficient. The creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move, its multiple claws rending the solid rocky walls as it charged toward them with single-minded, lethal purpose. Stone and Cross opened fire with everything they had while Petrov screamed in terror and tried to flee deeper into the facility. The creature's exotic hide seemed to absorb most of their weapon fire, the energy beams and projectiles having minimal effect on its obviously advanced construction. Only a direct hit from one of their explosive charges, detonated at close range near its head, managed to wound it enough to drive it back temporarily into the shadows. As it retreated, they could hear its calls being answered by dozens of similar voices from throughout the vast facility. They weren't dealing with a single creature. They were facing an entire colony or army of these things, all coordinating their response to the human intrusion. "We need to get out of here right now," Cross shouted urgently. But Kane was studying the alien symbols, covering the walls with increasing urgency and growing understanding of their significance. "Wait, please," he said, his scientific training overriding his natural fear. "I'm starting to decode what this place really is. It's not just a prison or simple containment facility. It's a sophisticated quarantine station designed to contain something specific. And according to these symbols, there are hundreds of these creatures contained in the deeper levels, possibly thousands." As Kane worked frantically to decode more of the alien symbols and understand their meaning, the horrible truth began to dawn on all of them. The facility's ancient power source had been failing gradually over millennia of continuous operation, and Earth's radio and television signals had been systematically reactivating dormant systems throughout the massive complex. The explosions the Soviets had detected weren't failed escape attempts or accidental detonations. They were successful breakouts. "The creatures that have already escaped from this place," Kane said quietly, his face pale in the artificial light of their emergency lamps. "They're not just wandering around the lunar surface aimlessly. They've been using the moon as a base of operations, systematically establishing new facilities and breeding grounds. And according to these symbols, many of them are already en route to Earth." More creatures emerged from the deeper chambers, forcing them into a desperate running battle through the maze-like tunnels that seemed to extend for miles beneath the lunar surface. They used every explosive charge they had, fighting back to back as the aliens pursued them, relentlessly, through passages that defied human understanding of architecture and engineering. The creatures seemed to know the facility's layout perfectly, using hidden passages and ventilation systems to flank their position and systematically cut off potential escape routes. Only Stone's military tactics and Cross's quick thinking kept them alive as they fought their way toward what they desperately hoped was the surface. Kane, despite his serious head injuries, managed to access what appeared to be the facility's central control system. The interface was completely alien, but the power readings and system diagnostics were universal enough for him to understand the basic operational parameters and current status. "The facility has a self-destruct system," he announced, his voice barely audible over the sounds of ongoing battle echoing through the tunnels. "Nuclear, powerful enough to crack the moon in half and sterilize everything within a 1,000-mile radius. It might be the only way to stop them from reaching Earth and beginning whatever they have planned." Stone stared at him, understanding the implications immediately. That would destroy a significant portion of the moon and rain radioactive debris down on Earth for decades. The tidal effects alone would devastate every coastline on the planet and kill millions of people. "Better than letting these things reach Earth in the numbers I'm seeing here," Kane replied grimly. "I've accessed their population databases and facility records. There are thousands of them in the deeper levels of this facility alone, and these symbols indicate there are multiple additional facilities like this one scattered across the lunar far side." The final battle took place in the facility's core chamber, a vast space filled with alien technology and hundreds of the creatures that had been awakened by their intrusion. The chamber was so enormous that their emergency lights couldn't reach the far walls, and the sounds of alien voices echoed from every direction, creating a cacophony of inhuman communication and coordination. Cross managed to activate one of the alien craft that had been stored in the chamber, its controls responding to her pilot's instincts, despite their utterly foreign design and configuration. The craft lifted off smoothly, its advanced weapon system somehow intuitive enough for her to provide effective air support while Stone planted their remaining explosive charges throughout the massive power core. The creatures swarmed toward them in coordinated waves, their multiple limbs allowing them to move across walls and ceilings as easily as floors. Their attack patterns showed sophisticated tactical thinking, with some creatures providing covering fire while others attempted to systematically flank their position and cut off escape routes. Stone fought desperately to buy Kane the time he needed to activate the facility's ancient self-destruct sequence, using every combat technique he'd learned in 2 different wars. The aliens were learning from their tactics with each attack, adapting their strategies and making the battle increasingly difficult and dangerous. 60 seconds to detonation, Kane announced as he input the final command sequences into the alien control system. The facility's systems responded with alarms that were physically painful to human ears, and emergency lighting bathed everything in a hellish red glow that made the alien creatures look even more nightmarish. Stone and Cross raced for their damaged lunar module, but the engine systems had been too badly damaged in their crash landing. The craft would never achieve the escape velocity necessary to clear the blast radius with both of them aboard, and there wasn't time to repair the damage. "Go without me," Stone told Cross, his decision made without hesitation. "I'll stay behind and manually boost your trajectory to give you enough velocity to reach orbit and get home safely." "I'm not leaving you behind," Cross shouted back, tears visible through her helmet visor. "We came here together. As a team, we leave together." "That's a direct order, pilot. Someone needs to get back to Earth to warn them about what's coming. Tell them we were heroes. Tell them we saved everyone we could, and that the sacrifice was worth it to buy humanity time to prepare." The nuclear explosion that followed lit up the lunar far side like a second sun, visible from Earth as a brief new star in the night sky. The blast was so powerful that it registered on seismographs around the world and sent shockwaves through the moon's core that would be detected by scientists for decades to come. Cross barely escaped in the lunar module, her craft battered by debris and deadly radiation as she struggled to reach Earth orbit. Her re-entry was harrowing, with damaged heat shields and failing systems, but she managed to crash land in the Pacific Ocean after what seemed like an eternity of free fall through the atmosphere. She floated in a life raft for 18 hours before being rescued by a Navy destroyer, clutching the mission footage that documented humanity's first contact with hostile alien intelligence. The official report listed the crew of Apollo 19 as killed in a training accident, and Cross was extensively debriefed before being quietly transferred to a desk job where she could be closely monitored. The news footage continued with a live broadcast from a television studio in New York. An elderly woman with silver hair sat across from a news anchor, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Despite the chaos erupting around the world as governments scrambled to respond to the leaked footage. "This is Jennifer Cross, now 74 years old," the anchor announced to the global audience, the sole survivor of the Apollo 19 mission, speaking publicly for the first time in 50 years. "Miss Cross, the government has categorically denied the authenticity of this footage. Can you verify what we've just witnessed?" Cross looked directly into the camera, her eyes still sharp and determined despite her age. "Everything you just saw is absolutely true. Rick Stone and Alan Kane died as heroes, sacrificing themselves to save Earth from an invasion that would have ended human civilization as we know it. But their sacrifice only bought us time to prepare." She reached into a bag beside her chair and pulled out several metallic objects that gleamed with an otherworldly light. The objects seemed to shift and change shape slightly as the camera focused on them, their surfaces reflecting light in ways that seemed to violate known laws of physics. "I kept these as proof," she continued. "Artifacts from the alien facility that government scientists have been unable to explain or replicate for 50 years. The technology is so far beyond our understanding that we can't even determine what some of these devices are supposed to do or how they function. The studio doors suddenly burst open as government officials in black suits stormed in, but Cross continued speaking, even as security guards moved to arrest her. "The threat isn't over," she said urgently to the camera. "The self-destruct only destroyed one facility. There are others scattered across the lunar far side, and they've been expanding for decades. The creatures that escaped before we destroyed the main facility have been establishing new bases, new breeding grounds, new launching points for an invasion that's been 50 years in the planning." As the officials reached her, Cross delivered her final message to the world. Apollo 19 wasn't just a mission. It was the opening battle of a war we've been fighting in secret for 50 years. The government has known about the alien presence since 1974, and they've done nothing to prepare the public for what's coming. And I'm afraid we're about to lose this war. The broadcast cut to emergency alerts appearing on screens worldwide. Military installations from NORAD to the Pentagon were reporting unknown objects descending from space at velocities that defied current understanding of propulsion technology. Radar stations across 6 continents were tracking multiple bogies entering Earth's atmosphere from the direction of the Moon, their flight patterns showing intelligence and coordination that ruled out any natural phenomena. In living rooms and bars, in offices and homes around the world, people looked up at the night sky with new eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. The moon, which had always been humanity's faithful companion in the darkness, now seemed sinister and threatening, and falling from that moon, visible as bright streaks across the darkening sky, came the advance guard of an invasion 50 years in the making. Fighter jets scrambled from military bases around the world, their pilots having trained for conventional air-to-air combat against human opponents. But the alien craft that descended from the lunar colonies were built with technology far beyond current human understanding, their hulls resistant to conventional weapons and their own armaments, capable of devastating entire city blocks with single shots. The first coordinated attacks began simultaneously across 12 major population centers, each strike calculated for maximum psychological impact. The creatures that emerged from the landing craft were the same nightmarish beings that Stone and Cross had fought in the lunar facility, but these were larger, more advanced, clearly evolved and improved through 50 years of careful preparation and selective breeding. In New York City, the first alien craft landed in Central Park, its arrival sending shockwaves through the surrounding skyscrapers and shattering windows for blocks in every direction. The creatures that emerged moved with terrifying purpose, their multiple limbs carrying advanced weapons that turned concrete and steel into vapor. Military units responding to the emergency found their conventional weapons largely ineffective against the aliens' advanced armor and superior tactics. Similar scenes played out in London, Tokyo, Moscow, and 8 other major cities around the globe. The aliens had clearly studied human military response patterns and positioned their forces to maximize confusion and minimize effective resistance. Communication networks were systematically jammed, preventing coordinated military responses. As humanity's military forces struggled to adapt to threats they'd never trained for and weapons they didn't understand, Jennifer Cross sat in a government detention facility, knowing that she'd done everything possible to warn the world. Through her small window, she could see the lights of alien craft moving across the night sky, like deadly stars. The story of Apollo 19 was over, but the war for Earth's survival had just begun in earnest. The 3 astronauts who had given their lives to buy humanity 50 years of preparation time had hoped their sacrifice would be enough. Now it remained to be seen whether the human race could survive the test that was coming. And somewhere, in the darkness of space, more ships continued launching from hidden bases scattered across the lunar far side, carrying an invasion force that had been planning this moment for half a century. The moon, humanity's ancient companion in the night sky, had become the staging ground for their own potential destruction. The war that began with 3 astronauts fighting for their lives in an alien facility beneath the lunar surface was about to engulf an entire planet. This time, there would be no heroes willing to sacrifice themselves to save everyone else. This time, humanity would have to save itself, or face extinction at the hands of an enemy they'd awakened but never truly understood. The invasion of Earth had begun, and the defenders had no idea what they were really fighting against. The creatures that had waited patiently for 50 years were finally making their move, and humanity's long night of terror was just beginning. In the chaos that followed, one thing became clear. The footage leaked by Danny Morrison had arrived exactly when humanity needed it most. Without advance warning, the alien assault would have been even more devastating. But now, at least, the world knew what they were facing. The question that remained was whether knowing would be enough to survive what was coming next.